So Jeff Goodell, thank you for joining me today. I wanted to have you on because you have a new book, The Heat Will Kill You First, Life and Death on a Scorched Planet. I think I have that right. You sent me a copy of it, which I appreciate. I read it, I really liked it. And I have to say, I am truly impressed at the level of commitment you have, that you arranged for a brutal heat wave to occur right when your book was coming out. I mean, how did you do that? I'm so impressed.
I know, it's so weird. It's kind of spooky and eerie because I've been working on this book for like 3.5 years, and I thought it was an interesting subject and a good subject, and a subject that would have kind of enduring interest given the direction our world is going. But the fact that literally the week that it's being published, we're in this extreme heat wave here in Texas. It's spooky. It's like I'm living in the pages of my book, and it's like I sometimes, I mean, it feels like I like conjured it up or something. Not, of course, that I did, but it's very weird. It's very weird.
Well, I mean, speaking for all Texans, let me just say, we get it. You have a book coming out. We'll go buy your book, but please turn it off. Okay, you've made your point. You've made your point. We should all read the book.
Yeah.
We're done.
Yeah, I'm with that. I'm with that. Yeah.
So the first time I think I ran across your writing was in really what I think is a masterpiece, your Rolling Stone article, Miami is Doomed, which I can't tell you how many students I've had read that, because to me, I'm a global average climate physics guy. The first thing I do when I get data is I global average it. So I don't think a lot about how climate influences people, because nobody really lives in the global average. But when I read that, I thought, wow, this is really how it's going to play out. And I guess and from that, you then wrote your book, The Water Will Come, which a book I listened to on during the pandemic, which I really enjoyed. And so the question is, how did you get from there to extreme heat? What was kind of your thought process?
Well, it was, very kind of simple in some ways. I was walking down the street in Phoenix in the summer, like 4 years ago, and I had to walk like 10 blocks to get to a meeting, and it was 116 or 117 degrees, and I just went out there without even thinking about it, and I thought, I'm going to die before I get 10 blocks to my meeting. And I was like, holy cow, this is just like intense and insane, and like, wow. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. But then I thought, well, this is global warming, right? I mean, we talk about heat as a central part of obviously what's happening on our planet right now, but reflecting on that moment when I was literally feeling the heat, I realized that like no one, at least I hadn't really thought about heat in the sense of what it really does to you and to a person and how dangerous it is. And, I was talking to a friend shortly after that, and he said to me, well, what is heat? And I was like, well, I don't really know. I mean, it's temperature, but what is, I couldn't even explain what heat was, right? And so I thought this is a kind of fertile thing to be thinking about. Like, how well do we understand the actual mechanisms of what heat does to our bodies and to the life around us? And then I started thinking about this idea of, the Goldilocks zone that scientists use to think about, life on other planets, this not too hot, not too cold idea of, if water is ice or vapor. And it just became apparent to me that this is a really rich subject, that there was a lot of stuff. People were familiar with the idea of heat, but didn't really understand it. And I didn't really understand it. And so I thought, this is a good idea.
So one of the things I thought was really well covered in your book and well explained was how extreme heat changes your relationship with the world. During this heat wave, for example, you always have to be thinking about the temperature when you're planning your day. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to work in the garden today. You think, okay, well, I'm working in the garden. When can I do it that I'm not going to die of heat stroke? And also, you had a chapter in there about air conditioning in Houston. And, air conditioning has changed because of extreme heat from something which was a luxury to something which now is a necessity for survival. It's like fresh water.
Well, yeah, because see, for me, air conditioning, I mean, I grew up in California in the Bay Area, and there was no air conditioning there. When I was a kid, I'd never, heard of air conditioning, basically. It's a kind of wonderful Mediterranean climate. It's just, changed now like all climates have. But when I was growing up, it was like, no car had air conditioning, no houses had air conditioning. I didn't think about it. And then I moved to New York and of course was introduced to it there. But one of the coincidences of this book is that I moved to Texas, like basically right when I began the book. And I didn't move to Texas in order to do this book about heat. I moved to Texas because I fell in love with a woman who lived here. But, it was a brutal kind of awakening to how heat shapes your life and the importance of air conditioning and this sense of the cooled and the doomed, in this kind of heat waves like we're having right now. Everyone thinks, oh, I'm inside, it's fine, but then they go outside and they go to their car and they touch the steering wheel and it's brutal. But they think it's this idea that as long as you're in your air conditioned cell, you'll be okay. But of course, a lot of people are not in their air conditioned cells, or they can't afford to keep their air conditioning on. I mean, one of the toughest kind of experiences in reporting this book was in Phoenix when I went around to a bunch of kind of poor neighborhoods where I met a lot of people who, could only afford to have their AC on for 45 minutes, or they were actually, I went to one woman's house where she was actually making the calculation of the cost it would take to run the air conditioning for an hour or an hour and a half and trying to figure out, is the temperature okay? And, she was like a 70-year-old woman, vulnerable to heat. She wanted to keep the air conditioning on, but she also was basically having to choose between like eating and staying cool. And that's brutal. And as our world gets hotter, that's more and more going to be the kind of bargain that a lot of people are going to have to make. And a lot of them are going to lose that bargain and die.
So, yeah, that's a fantastic and really poignant example of how hard adaptation is going to be. It's not the case that you can just say, oh, everyone will get air conditioning. I mean, who's going to pay for that? And not just the installation of the air conditioning, but you have to pay for electricity to run it. And that can be hundreds of dollars a month. The other thing, which you didn't really talk about in your book, but I've gotten a sense of, because I've been reading a bunch of these climate books now. I've been reading Fire Weather by Valiant and The Great Displacement by Jake Biddle, which are all really good books. And the thing that strikes me is how these things all interact. If you read the book Fire Weather, it talks about extreme heat. How do you get forest fires? Well, step one, turn up the heat. That's how you get a lot of fires. And so, the other thing which I think is really important to understand is extreme heat affects everything. It's one of the reasons why the oceans are sea levels rising. It's because of the heat's melting ice and it's expanding the ocean. And it's so I mean, it's this, nonlinear coupled system that's just going, the impact is going to keep getting worse. I guess what I read an interview you did with Texas Monthly yesterday, and besides misspelling my name, the thing that jumped out,
which got corrected. It got corrected.
I got corrected, but I have a very long memory. Anyway, besides misspelling my name, the thing that struck me is you said you're optimistic. So explain your optimism.
My optimism, though, has to do with, the fact that heat is relatively simple to protect us, and we can save a lot of lives very simply with heat by simply figuring out better ways to talk about it, better ways to understand the risk. I mean, one of the reasons that I wrote my book, and one of the things I hope people take away from it, is like a better understanding of the risk of heat and how to deal with it, right? I almost died of a heat stroke climbing a mountain in Nicaragua one time, and I had no idea what was happening to me. I had no idea what was going on. And, now I understand that I was verging on a heat stroke. But most people don't know that. They don't understand the risks. And so it's relatively easy by, communicating better about heat, different kinds of heat warnings, thinking differently about how you do work, taking breaks, drinking water, getting in the shade, all that stuff, understanding how exercise increases your body's metabolism and raises your inner heat levels, things like that. My optimism comes from, we can save a lot of lives just by a better understanding of heat. And my other optimism comes from, I think that, and this is more broadly with climate change in general, is that it's causing us to rethink a lot about how we live. And we've done a lot of dumb shit, right? I mean, and the heat thing is part of it. All these sort of sealed buildings that only function if you have an air conditioning system. I mean, here in Texas, I call air conditioning a kind of technology of forgetting, because here in Texas, people knew how to build for hot weather. I mean, these dog trot houses, building houses so that they capture the breezes, they have shade. I mean, there's lots of ways of rethinking how we live, whether it's urban trees or how we build houses that can protect ourselves from heat. And, a lot of the dumb stuff of modernism, I think, will be kind of renovated and thought differently about and lead to a better way of life, a better connection with nature, a better, safer world. And so I think it's like very tangible what can be done to make things better.
I guess the other thing, speaking of Texas, that gives me optimism is the growth of renewable energy. I think that's really, if it wasn't for that, I would be very discouraged. But the fact is that at this point, our cheapest energy is renewable energy. And the only reason it's not growing faster is because of politics. It's this, as I tell my students, climate change is not a scientific problem. It's not a technical problem. It's a political problem.
And this heat wave is really showing the benefits of having all this clean power on the grid right now, because the solar and the wind are what's really keeping things going, batteries and stuff, and one thing we didn't talk about is, with this whole, dependence on air conditioning, is the risk of blackout then becomes, huge, right? I mean, my book of a infrastructure expert in Arizona talks about, a heat Katrina, right? Where you have a big city like Austin or Dallas or Phoenix or whatever in the middle of one of these big heat waves and the power goes out. And then, things get real serious real fast. Because you have a lot of buildings that have no ventilation and all that kind of stuff. And so I agree with you on the growth of renewables in Texas. It's not talked about nearly enough. And but we're seeing it being, the virtues of it being proved in real time right now.
Yeah, and you also see the political power of fossil fuels because they're trying to stop it. It's like this thing that's unambiguously good for society, but not good for them. They would rather make money than benefit society. So you see sort of the corruption of our economic system also playing out in real time. Anyway, Jeff Goodell, I want to thank you for joining me. This has been great. And good luck on the book. And I will see you around cyberspace.
Great. Thanks a lot for having me. Great conversation.